How is everybody doing? This is Ben Naya, aka Black Bear. I have family in the Choctaw Nation, in the Seminole Nation, and in the Chickasaw Nation, and a few others. But today, we're going to be touching on this book by Red Silver Fox Thunderbird called Revealing America's Dark-Skinned Past, Volume 1. Now, the unique thing about the authors of this book is that they are copper-colored aboriginals, which I can take you to some pictures of the people. This is the mother who does a lot of research in the writing. She has a YouTube channel, and this is her son, who also does writing and speaks on the YouTube channel as well. These people are very knowledgeable when they speak and also in the writings of this book. Now, we're not going to be here long. I just want to read a few passages in the book to you guys. As you can see, this is the first page. And they have all their information, so you can contact them when the book was created. And here's the table of contents. We're only going to be touching on today the introduction, and the Clovis people were not the first people. As you can see, the other chapters in the book, which we'll touch on in the future. Introduction. Brown-skinned people, from very light to dark brown, have existed in the Americas for many thousands of years. However, history wants us to believe that the existence of black people in the Western Hemisphere began with African slave trade, the African slave trade, which is the lie that we've been taught in our school books, in our history classes, in our colleges, through media, movies such as Roots and Amistad and various other movies that push the indoctrination to hide your true identity from you. It is from this falsehood that many people in the United States have been manipulated into thinking that all slaves came from Africa, and the black populations in the United States are descendants of those Africans. While many blacks may have some African genetics in their bloodline, that should not be the determining factor to define all blacks in the United States as African American. Many blacks have European genetics in their bloodline, but they are not defined as European Americans. See, we have to stop going by their classifications that they've given us over the years, changing our identity to the point where we don't know unless we do deep research, which we are going to do the deep research. Many African Americans have been told by their ancestors that they have Indian blood, which is true. Like in my family, no one has ever said that we came from Africa. Everyone has always said that we are aboriginal to this country, and everyone has a grandma, a great-grandma, a great-great-grandma that tells you of her or in their Native American roots. However, Over time, this information has been dismissed by most. Even though this oral history continues to get passed down through the generations, traditionally, Africans and Native Americans pass history down orally through tribal elders, Native or the tribal griot Africans. That the Indians, like the Africans in America, relied upon oral media for the transmission of their history from one memorial generation to the next, meant that the dissolution of their social structure would destroy their history and therefore complete the erasure of their existence. And they will tell you that our people never wrote anything down, but we have glyphs and writings on rocks and many artifacts that show our history. They even have a codex, which they say that they destroyed most of it, but you destroyed our history that was written if you did so. And most of it was word of mouth, because we were a people that lived our traditions. We showed our traditions. It wasn't just something that we read from a book. It was actions, it was living, it was doing. That disillusion or disbanding of the social structure, or in other words, terminating the glue which held those societies together, was the key that was needed to destroy the passing down of family history, and consequently destroy the moral being of the people. When a people are broken morally, it is easy at that point to mold and shape their minds to be what you want them to be, and to erase the things you want them to forget. The annihilation of the family structure practiced on the brown-skinned people and what became the United States, namely the indigenous Americans and the Africans, became a more imperative operation within the indigenous communities. The conquering and colonizing Europeans needed to remove everything that would benefit their existence in the newly occupied territories. And the one thing that stood the most in their way was the indigenous Americans. While many indigenous cultures were decimated through disease, warfare, and slavery, what wasn't put into the equation was the resiliency of the dark-skinned people that the Europeans encountered upon their arrival here in the Americas. They took your written histories and they destroyed it for this very reason, because through the generations you will become known as Negro, as Black, as African American. They needed you out of the way to create the pathway for these Hollywood Indians, these Asians, and so forth. They needed you to believe that you came from Africa. The true history of the indigenous people of the United States, and in particular the entire eastern and southeastern United States, has been banished into non-existence, and the true identity of those people have not been taught. The fact is, if the real history and identities of the indigenous people of America were revealed, we would know that the homeland of millions of Black Americans is actually here in the United States and not in Africa as currently explained. It is time for everyone to comprehend that history was and is not totally honest in its interpretation of the facts of the indigenous peoples of the Americas, and that many Blacks in the United States are descendants of those indigenous Americans. Wake up, my people. They've lied to you long enough. They strapped you in the bed so that you would stay asleep. It's time to break those bonds. This is chapter 1. Clovis people were not the first people. how the Americas got populated remains in much speculation. The theory which has a stronghold in history books is the migration theory that humans migrated out of Europe into Asia over the Bering Strait and down and across into Americas. This migration would have taken place between 12,000 to 15,000 years ago after the last ice age melted the ice on the Bering Strait to expose the land for the humans to cross. This theory was developed in the 1700s and has basically remained unchanged. And here's something with that. The chronology of all this stuff. We can't take the chronologies that they give us as 100% concrete evidence, like this here about the Bering Strait. They've recently, in the last couple years, discovered that this stuff didn't happen as early as they believe it to happen, as we have here. This is a clip straight from the Princeton website. Bering Land Bridge formed surprisingly late during the last ice age. The Princeton scientists found that the Bering Land Bridge was flooded until 35,700 years ago, with its full emergence occurring only shortly before the migrations of humans into the Americas. They're still discovering new facts about these things, and they're telling us that these Asians could not have been the first people to cross over here, because this stuff happened much later than they originally believed in the 1700s, which that theory from the 1700s has, to most people from then until now, been the concrete evidence that they have been using, to find out within the last few years that that was not concrete evidence. We have here a few clips from old newspaper that I found, and it reads, "Color in the cross sections how positively that these first Americans never migrated from Asia." Never migrated from Asia, a land of straight black-haired people. We have ample evidence that the ancient civilizations of Mexico, Yucatan, and storied Atlantis date back at least 250,000 years, forming the true Garden of Eden of the world. And that fossil skeletons of Florida, Rancho Brea, and the caves of California prove the contention of exceeding age of mankind along the American equatorial belt, and that they evolved here. And that's a topic for another story that we're going to touch on. That Florida was believed to be Eden. It is believed to be Eden. Even most plants mentioned in the biblical scriptures, these plants and trees are only indigenous to the Americas and to Florida, such as gopher wood. While I am sure that many humans entered the Americas across the Bering Strait, this could not have been the only way humans entered the Americas. The problem with the Bering Strait theory is that there is much archaeological evidence that humans existed in the Americas before the Ice Age ended, just as we just read in the newspaper article that I just showed you guys. Clovis people, who are considered to be the first humans in the Americas, are said to have entered the Americas across the Bering Strait from Asia, which we now know is not true. However, current archaeological and biological evidence does not support the assumption of the Clovis migration theory about Paleo and Indian migration sources. And as you can see, some of those earlier spearheads and tips that they have there, some made of stone, some made of certain metals. Scientists studied skulls, genetic patterns, and dental variations to verify the first entry of Mongolian Asians into the Americas that only began after 3000 BC. The Clovis points that were found 9,400 years ago in the US do not match the points found in Asia, the land where they were said to originate. It would appear that the Clovis technology was not an Asian import. It was invented here in the US. So if these people were not Clovis, where did they come from? It appears that there is a growing body of archaeological evidence suggesting that there were other peoples here. It appears that the Clovis people were not the first people. So if the Clovis are not the first people here, who were? And what this depiction at the bottom is showing is all these belts that you could take to get to other places around the world. You barely even had to have sailing skills to even take these places and get to where you wanted to go, because the streams are so powerful, it would just transport you to where you needed to go from entry to exit. There are increasing indications that there were early migrations into the Americas that predate the thawing of the ice glaciers which covered all of Canada and half of the United States. Sites in Chile, Brazil, Mexico, Oklahoma, and South Carolina suggest that the humans were in the Western Hemisphere as early as 30,000 years ago to perhaps 60,000 years ago. These sites are all along the Atlantic Ocean current, except for Chile, which is only 400 miles away from the Atlantic Ocean, which would suggest a migration of humans straight out of Africa to the Americas. Clues from the skeletons, skulls hint that the people may not be of Southern Asian descent, which would contradict the dominant theory of New World settlement. As I said, it's time to break the bonds that they placed on our minds. It's time to remove the wool that they placed over our spiritual eyes so that we can understand what their theories are doing to us, which is hurting our intellect more than it's helping, which is exactly why they spent trillions of dollars on this type of things over centuries to keep you lost. Ivan von Sertima, who was an associate professor of African studies at Rutgers University, describes the Atlantic currents in this book. Those currents that we just saw on the last page. These currents is now what he's talking about. These currents right here. These currents. Those currents. He describes the currents in his book that came before Columbus as currents that move with great power and swiftness from Africa to America. These currents may be likened to marine conveyor belts. Once you enter them, you are transported even against your will, even with no navigational skills, from one bank of the ocean to the other, which is another topic we're going to be touching on from a book called Ancient Civilizations of Egypt that explained that the South Americans traveled to Africa and they cultivated and showed them ways to create buildings and clothing and names. It all connects to what this is saying right here, the travel from one place to another. Recent evidence found over 4 meters in the soil in Allendale County, South Carolina, has uncovered through radiocarbon dating sediments with two dates of 50,300 and 51,700 on burnt plant remains. Dr. Albert Goodyear, archaeologist for the University of South Carolina, said this is the oldest radiocarbon dated site of human activity in North America. He hypothesizes that there were people here not long after the dispersal of humans from Africa. So before people started dispersing from Africa, there were people already here, which connects to that book I just told you about, Ancient Civilizations of Egypt, which would tell you that when Africans came here, there were native peoples already here. He hypothesized that there were people here not long after the dispersal of humans from Africa 60,000 to 80,000 years ago. This would suggest that the original inhabitants of the Americas were of what they call Negroid stock and not a Mongolian stock, the later not entering the Americas till after the Ice Age. So when the Mongolian stock arrived in the Americas, it was already populated by what they call Negroid people. One must also assume that it is the mixing of these populations at multiple and varying degrees which created the numerous Negroid indigenous cultures of the Americas. Which earlier on, I believe there was some mixing going on, but the Native Americans were a people that didn't believe with mixing with everyone. Just as the Shemites, which we'll touch on that topic as well, that many of the earlier explorers believed the Native Americans to be of the Shemitic stock. These people didn't need to mix to be the colors that they are today and that they were. They were already this color. Most of the world was this color. Places like Melanesia and many other places in what they call Southern Asia were of this color without mixing already. We have to understand the lengths that these people would go to hide your true identity, because most of these peoples that hid your identity back then are the same peoples that are living off your true identity today. Both native and Shemitic stocks. There are imposters that are living the lives of these groups right now in the world today. These newer beings. We cannot continue to live in the fog. We cannot continue to live in the haze. All you have to do is do the research, and most times your name will trace back to some person on an Aboriginal list or a Dawes Rolls. There's many avenues for you to find out who you were. Many of these names can trace back to Ireland and Scotland, in France, in Germany, Netherlands, Italy, other places that originally had copper-colored peoples. Places that had where they found mounds in these places, just as they found in the Americas. It's a connection. It's a connection. And when you open your eyes, you will be able to connect the dots. Once again, this is Benaya, aka Black Bear. Please like, share, and subscribe. Yakoke.